All right, so forget positive thinking. Forget everything you've ever heard about chasing happiness. We're diving into the multi-million copy bestseller, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which argues that the key to a good life isn't a better attitude, it's actually getting a better class of problems. It's a pretty radical idea that flips the entire self-help world on its head, and we're about to unpack exactly why it's so powerful.
Our journey starts in a kind of weird place, a graveyard. Etched on the tombstone of the famous and, let's be honest, often controversial author Charles Bukowski are just two simple words: don't try.
And right there, that's the central puzzle we're here to solve. I mean, think about it. Why would a guy who fought his way to literary stardom, a guy who seems like the poster child for never giving up, choose this as his final message to the world? It feels like a total contradiction, right?
To get it, you really have to understand the man himself. Bukowski was, well, the absolute last person you'd ever want life advice from. He was a drunk, a gambler, a total lout, and his raw, unflinching honesty about his own failures is exactly what makes him the perfect place to start.
Just take a look at this timeline. Bukowski's life was basically a masterclass in failure. For decades, he was a post office clerk, just drowning his sorrows in booze, while his writing was getting rejected over and over again as crude and depraved. But then, at age 50, everything changed. A small publisher took a risk, he quit his job, and in just 3 weeks, he hammered out his first novel. He went on to sell millions of books. Sounds like the classic underdog story, doesn't it?
Well, here's the twist. His success didn't come from trying to be a winner. It came from him completely accepting that he was a loser and being brutally, beautifully honest about it in his writing. He wasn't chasing success. He was just telling his truth, unfiltered. That is what don't try really means.
Bukowski's unapologetic acceptance of his own dark side is the perfect antidote to a huge problem in our culture today: our toxic obsession with being positive all the time. Mark Manson argues this constant pressure to be happy is actually making us miserable, trapping us in what he calls the feedback loop from hell.
Does this sound familiar to you? You feel anxious about something, and then you immediately start feeling anxious about being anxious. You feel guilty, and then you feel guilty for feeling guilty. Before you know it, you're in this downward spiral of judging yourself. And this vicious cycle happens because our culture has hammered into us that it's just not okay to feel bad. This is a perfect example of something the philosopher Alan Watts called the backwards law. The more you desperately try to be happy, the more you just remind yourself that you aren't. It's like the very act of chasing a positive feeling just pushes it further and further away.
Manson just nails it with this quote: "The desire for a more positive experience is, itself, a negative experience. But accepting a negative experience, paradoxically, that's a positive one. By simply not giving a fuck that you feel bad, you totally short-circuit that whole feedback loop."
So, if chasing happiness is a trap, what's the alternative? Well, Manson's answer is pretty radical. Stop trying to avoid problems and start choosing better problems. He argues that the secret to a good life isn't getting rid of struggle. It's about finding the struggle that's actually meaningful to you.
And this leads to what might be the most important question you can ask yourself. Not what do I want to enjoy, but what pain am I willing to sustain? Because everything worthwhile in life has some kind of struggle baked into it. Real happiness isn't the finish line, it's what you find during the climb.
This slide is just a perfect real-world example. On one side, you've got Dave Mustaine. He gets kicked out of Metallica, so what does he do? He starts his own legendary band Megadeth. But he always measured himself against Metallica, and because of that, always saw himself as a failure. On the other side, Pete Best, the original drummer for the Beatles. He also got kicked out and was devastated, but he eventually chose to value his family over fame, and by his own account, ended up way happier. Same situation, different values, and totally different outcomes.
So here's the key takeaway. Your identity, who you are, is defined by the struggles you're willing to embrace. People who choose the pain of going to the gym get fit. People who choose the stress of building a startup can become successful entrepreneurs. It's all about falling in love with the process, not just fantasizing about the prize at the end. All right, now for the next big idea, and I gotta warn you, this one can be a tough pill to swallow, especially in our world of participation trophies. You are not special. But, as Manson argues, accepting your own averageness is actually the first step toward achieving something truly extraordinary. Manson calls this problem the tyranny of exceptionalism. I mean, just think about our social media feeds. They are flooded with stories of the absolute best, the worst, and the most extreme. This constant exposure totally warps our perspective, and it makes just being average feel like a total failure. And that breeds this sense of entitlement, this belief that we all deserve to be great without actually earning it.
So, what's a better way to measure our self-worth? Manson gives us a new metric. It's not about how you handle the good times. Anyone can do that. It's about how you handle the bad times. Real self-worth comes from being okay with your own flaws and failures.
To make this more concrete, Manson gives us a list of what he calls shitty values. You know, things like pleasure, which is fleeting and often leads to addiction, or material success, because you'll never feel like you have enough. Needing to always be right just isolates you. And, as we've already seen, trying to stay positive all the time just backfires. These are like the empty calories of life that just lead to worse problems.
And this is where it gets really interesting. It's a paradox. The people who become truly great at something do so because they are obsessed with improvement. And that obsession is fueled by the core belief that they aren't already great, that they're mediocre, they're average, and they have a long, long way to go. It's the ultimate anti-entitlement mindset.
This brings us to the final and maybe the most profound of Manson's ideas. To truly understand what matters in life, we have to confront the one thing we are all programmed to avoid: our own death. Manson brings up a concept from the writer Ernest Becker called death terror. It's that low-level anxiety that's always humming beneath the surface, that deep-down knowledge that we're all going to die. And this fear drives us to create what Becker called immortality projects, things like our careers, our families, our art. Basically, ways to feel like a part of us will live on after we're gone.
But instead of running from this fear, Manson says we should use death as a compass. Because our time is limited, it forces us to cut through all the trivial, superficial stuff and ask ourselves what truly matters. It's the ultimate filter for everything we care about. Confronting our own mortality forces us to ask that one huge question. What is your legacy? When you're gone, what will you have left behind? What mark will you have made on the world?
And that really brings us to the core philosophy of the entire book. True self-improvement isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about getting better at choosing what to care about. When you prioritize better values, you choose better struggles. When you give better fucks, you get better problems. And when you have better problems, you live a better life.
In the end, it's the fact that our time here is limited that gives our lives meaning. Without that final deadline, nothing would really matter at all. So the real question isn't how to avoid death, but how to live a life that truly matters before we reach the end.